Hey there, you awesome people! I hope your day has been nothing short of fantastic. Welcome back to a brand new episode of What If Deku Had Green Lightning. Don't forget to shower some appreciation onto the incredible author responsible for this fanfiction. The link is conveniently waiting for you in the description box down below. If you're totally vibing with this what if scenario, drop me a comment and let your thoughts be known. And while you're at it, don't miss out on other mind-blowing what ifs on this channel. Alright, without further ado, let's dive straight into this video. Izuku gave a slight wave to Hawks as he flew away from the rubble in which the Nomu was currently buried under. A feeling of dread settled in his stomach that was quickly crushed whilst he began pulling a large amount of charge into his right arm, his left hand gripping his right elbow to stabilize himself. His eyes were charged as he was watching for any form of movement within the concrete dust from the collapsed building. A slight wind swept through the area, blowing the dust towards Izuku, who had to shield his face and eyes with his left arm but kept the right arm raised with a steadily building charge. He felt the sting of the concrete dust on his open palm, but he was soon distracted by a loud crashing sound, followed by an ear-piercing shriek. "Izuku, are you sure about this?" A voice rang out from his earpiece, distinctly Nizu. In the background he knew were several other teachers, but all remained deathly silent. "There's no other choice. Do you have the stats?" Izuku responded, referring to some information he had asked for already on his flight over. "We're working on it, alright. Keep me up to date." Nizu would have responded the same, but with the news coverage, it was already done for him. The nation had stopped to watch, a tense silence that hovered over Japan with one unspoken question. Will he win? Because no one knew what would happen if he didn't. And survival was in but a few minds. Back at UA, the teachers' conference room was a deathly silence, each teacher pulling whatever strings they could to get the information Izuku requested, effectively turning into what only the smartest of heroes used their agencies for: information gathering and communication at the hero's request. And currently, the hero fighting for everyone needed all the help he could get. Luckily for him, some of the foremost and most interconnected individuals in Hero Society were on his info team. Yagi Tashinori, formerly All Might, was effectively lending his pull power to each individual teacher and their connections to bring information that may otherwise remain behind any restriction, Nizu being the head communicator summarizing all the information for Izuku. Aizawa was helping with strategic analysis whilst Cementos assisted with defensive maneuvers. A few teachers were glued to the news, watching as it went down and relaying information to the others whilst everyone else was on research duty. In all, the teachers were incredibly tense, but doing their best to support the current star student. Comparatively, the students were a mess. Whilst most students outside of 3A and 1A were not directly involved with Izuku, save for Haschum and Shinso, who were both stressed the hell out, and in Hatsume's case, she had very few friends outside of Izuku and Shinso, so she and the purple-haired boy were in the workshop, side by side as Hatsume's stress tinkered and Shinso was pacing. 1A dorms were chaos, but not in the usual dysfunctional yet functional family sense. Instead, several students were stress-eating. Yayorozu was doing her best to make Bakugo relax before he blew something else up. No one was blaming him for the dishwasher. They intended to see if they could get a new one anyway because half the time the bloody thing didn't work. Ida was almost literally sprinting across the living room floor and Todoroki was being calmed by an Asa. Several other members of the class were pacing, along with some who were using stress balls provided by Yayorozu, who was also using one. Unsurprisingly, the news was on T.V, the volume up to the max to see if they could hear anything going on, which they could in snippets, with the newscasters silent at the gravity of the situation. But the worst was the 3A dorms. The common room was a mess and Nejire was shaking slightly as she resisted the urge to use all her energy just to go out there and help him, or even tell him to run away. But she knew she couldn't. Izuku was one of, if not the strongest, of them all. And he was backed against a wall to hold off long enough until he could win, or the government could think of an emergency solution of some kind. And she knew they had one. But she dreaded to think what would happen if they did it. She had already broken the glass she initially dropped when she saw Izuku going back to fight the Nomu. Her heart was racing and her eyes were watering as she saw the news. At the same time, Mirio and Tamaki were together, sitting on the same couch with Nejire, just on the opposite arm. Their hands were clutched tightly as Mirio was clenching his other fist and Tamaki kept turning his arm into various different parts. And Eri was being hugged tightly by her mama, Loki being used as a soft toy. The little girl wasn't quite fully aware of the gravity of the situation, but just saw it as her papa going out to fight a big villain on TV. She hummed happily, not looking back to her adoptive mother's and uncle's distraught faces as she had her eyes glued on the screen. Back with Izuku, who was about to fire the first shot, jumped slightly when the Nomu screeched, throwing the building rubble on top of it away. Thinking fast, Izuku did a quick flip with a low-powered kick to produce a wave of air that briefly froze the flying debris in its path before pushing it all away, clearing the dust. The air wave eventually hit the Nomu that had now burst out of the rubble, but did not even slightly shift it as it turned its head and began cackling. "Did the bird run away?" it asked, an evil grin on its face as its eyes squinted at the young hero before it. "Are you stronger? We're about to find out, aren't we?" Izuku responded as the Nomu returned its growths into a more standard humanoid structure. However, it had several vents on its back for its jet propulsion, and then its right arm began growing drastically. It pulsed with the massive muscle fibers and veins within, and it grew to twice the size of the Nomu, close to thrice the size of Izuku. The arm then rapidly launched at Izuku with the intent to completely decimate him. With barely any space to spare, Izuku dashed to the right, dodging it all as he used a short blast from his left hand to do so. The lightning slightly damaged the road and lightly charred the arm but did little else. As he came to a standstill and the Nomu prepared to sweep the arm, Izuku fired his charged blast. The green lightning briefly circled around his arm before firing in a deafening bang, his arm being thrown up from the recoil. It struck the Nomu, who was enveloped in streaks of green as it produced large flat sections of the green plasma on the body of the creature, almost instantaneously eviscerating various sections of the creature's limbs. It took mere moments to regrow them and was soon making a beeline for the boy, the powerful jets on its back making it a blur to anyone outside of the top 10 or big 3. But to Izuku, it wasn't particularly fast. Izuku powered his legs and jumped forwards, hopping over the Nomu and avoiding its attacks as he quickly spun to land on the rubble he was flying towards feet first, planting him firmly on the rubble he was flying towards. It tilted slightly but effectively stopped him as he was now on a taller footing than the Nomu. It made Izuku ever so slightly taller than the Nomu, even if it was hunching over constantly. The Nomu chuckled. "You're fast, but not maneuverable. You couldn't properly fly earlier," it said, its wings expanding from its back and expanding to its immense wingspan before it began preparing its air thrusters. The wings spread out and the air began coming out of the thrusters on its back at incredible speed, causing the road below to fracture, crack and break as it was building up speed. As it did this, Izuku spread his arms and with it let his green lightning wings expand. At the speed of light it reached the ends, the cobweb-style lattice structure forming his jagged spiked green wings. "Nizu, start the timer." "Got it." With that, Nizu had started a timer Izuku had him set so he could track the amount of time he had before he would start experiencing forms of drawback in the moment, such as reduced output and various distractions such as headaches and fuzziness or, more worryingly, loss of consciousness. As he did so, he beat the wings once and from the tip of each shot a bolt of lightning, briefly shrinking the wings before he began filling them again and began flying upwards. Each bolt connected with the respective shoulder of the Nomu, causing it to pause briefly from the impact as Izuku got further away. The Nomu began chuckling, and with a final blast of its jets it blasted into the air after Izuku. It was easily able to match his current speed as the creature soared through the air after the green streak. To the spectators on the ground that were evacuating, a green blur was flying in tandem to a black one, the two engaging in the intricate dance of air battle as each would aim to land a glancing blow on the other until the other used a burst of speed to dodge, at which point they would quickly retract. However, the Nomu was smart and began to adapt, soon able to predict Izuku's movements. With that knowledge, it carefully manipulated him into flying towards a building, much to the green lightning user's irritation. Izuku cautiously extended his senses to within the building, checking for any signs of life within. Thankfully there were none as he sped up, his wings still flapping behind him as he angled himself to cut through the building like a hot knife through butter. He brought an arm in front of his face as a secondary shield, then pulses of lightning as a shield that were cycling so fast it created a visible difference in the heat in front of him, thankful for the insulation and protection of the metal gauntlets. As he flew through the building, the concrete evaporated before him, and he emerged on the other side of the building, which quickly began crumbling atop the chasing Noma. "Stop running!" It bellowed as it pulled a massive arm back to demolish the crumbling building, debris flying everywhere. However, with the brief slowdown, Izuku was able to prepare his next attack, building up charge within his right wing. The thin lattice structure of his right wing layered over several times, creating a wing that was disproportionately bright compared to the other. The jagged green tips were bright flares, blindingly bright if you looked directly at it. Izuku, with the attack ready, spun around briefly to get an eye on the Nomu, which was rapidly catching up to him. "Nizu, charge strength 75, capacity 13. Izuku yelled quickly. "Understood." Nizu responded immediately after slight clacking. At UA, this noise indicated that Nizu had given one of the teachers the job of running the calculating machine. The principal and 2 students had rigged up to gauge the strength of various charges during their testing. It was coded and built, with the help of Hatsume after Power Loader begged that she be taken off his hands for at least 5 minutes, so he could have a cup of coffee without the constant fear of the workshop exploding, to work with extremely low charges, typically of 0.01 charge strength, and even lower capacity. These numbers were all relative to a fixed system they had set up at some point whilst testing. It was hyper-accurate, but with such large numbers would be very slow. It let Nizu and Izuku gauge the strength, recoil, and any other potential impacts of specified charges. This would be important to limit any damage Izuku ended up doing to himself. Speaking of, Izuku began flying backwards, watching the Nomu beginning to speed up again whilst the hero student began rotating to land on the top of another building nearby, skidding slightly as he landed, digging his heels in to stop himself as he raised both arms towards the Nomu. The lightning circling his body all was pulled away, instead going into his wings with the left becoming twice the original latticing, whilst the right wing was quadruple the original latticing, with the flare tips burning brighter and crackling towards the ground. "Clear to fire. Shouldn't be withdrawals, and I took the liberty of running some higher numbers as well. You should be good up to strength 100 with capacity 15 for about 5 shots before you start running into issues," Nizu told him. "Thanks. And we'll be hitting that cap very quickly," Izuku responded somberly. Nizu did not respond. After all, there wasn't much he could say to his student, the one who had the weight of the nation resting upon his shoulders. Izuku's left wing wrapped tightly around his left arm, forming large surfaces of green lightning along his gauntlet, the lightning also circling around it rapidly. He brought his left arm to aim at the Nomu, using his right as support whilst he prepared himself. The Nomu was flying straight at him. "Full impact railgun shot!" Izuku yelled, a small pellet ejecting from the palm of his left arm as it fired. The deafening noise was quick to follow as the lightning was used to fire it, as was the impact. The projectile slammed into the torso of the Nomu and sent it flying back, the speed of it faster than it could react to, let alone move to dodge. It flew back into the ground, slamming through the building the 2 just tore through and fully bringing it to the ground on top of it. At the same time, Izuku's left arm got thrown back from the recoil at the elbow, thankfully not injuring him as he then swapped arms. This time, however, with his right wing. This wing, a much tighter lattice with bright flares, then coiled completely around his right arm, forming a bizarre cover. He braced this arm with his left arm at the elbow, and began condensing the lightning into a blade-like object, the entire edge the bright, emerald green flares. He brought his right arm back behind to his back right, waiting for the Nomu to emerge. And when it did, it charged at him with a fury that he did not anticipate. It jumped at him and swung its right arm back and around, with it revealing dozens of tendrils, forced from beneath the flesh of its forearm. Each one lashed towards Izuku at supersonic speed, all targeting various points on him. Izuku closed his eyes, and just as the first one was about to hit him, he opened them again. His pupils narrowed and the whites fractured with green lightning as his gaze locked onto the nearest tendril. He rapidly removed charge from his legs and moved it to his left arm, forming a large blade that extended about a meter. The blade itself was very spiny looking, only the outline being filled in sections that originated from the base of the gauntlet to connect to the edge of the blade. The edge was a fluorescent green and Izuku began slashing with it, his eyes tracking each target best he could. With sharp, swift strikes he severed almost all the tendrils. Unfortunately, he wasn't able to catch two of them, however was quick to retract his energy into his left arm and quickly grab one. However, the other struck him in his right leg, getting stuck part way in. Izuku gritted his teeth tight, promising he would apologize to his orthodontist as he ripped the one in his left hand away from the Nomu, which proceeded to use the one in Izuku's right leg as leverage to pull the hero student towards him. Izuku winced in pain but did not flinch as he pulled his right hand above his head, using the momentum of the Nomu flying towards him and pulling him towards it as whipped its other arm back and began filling it with muscle to attack him with. At this point, Izuku began his attack. "Lightning Lance!" he cried out as the lightning on his right arm formed exactly that. He brought it down in a swinging motion, forcefully severing the Nomu's right arm from it, before pulling it back and stabbing it into the now alarmed creature's torso. Disperse! With a great flash of lightning, Izuku was thrown back as all the lightning charged within the lance was suddenly dispersed. A great crashing noise came from the attack as both thunder and the Nomu being thrown deep into the ground, effectively destroying its body. Izuku crashed hard into another building, however quickly repositioned himself despite the pain of his ribs and in his legs. "Izuku! That did not look like any charges we had specified," Nizu called over the earpiece as Izuku landed on the ground, feeling an unsurprisingly sharp pain in his leg. "Yeah, my bad," he chuckled. "Did not mean to release it all at once. Kinda panicked with the thing stabbing my leg. There. But watch out, it's not done yet." Nizu came over the earpiece. "It's reforming itself from its head. Permission to exterminate?" Izuku responded quickly, returning a constant stream of lightning through his body. "Permission granted. Take care," was Nizu's response. Izuku was quick to spread his initial wings once more, beginning to feel a slight drain on his energy levels as he rose to the skies, using a bottle that Recovery Girl gave many students of what was basically a quick clot to prevent the blood from dripping all over town as he fought. By the time he rose above the building line again, the Nomu had completely reformed and was glaring at him like a predator would glare at prey that dare attack it. This time, it had put more of its mass into the thrusters on its back, and began whirring up charge as Izuku did the same in his hands. The real fight had hardly just begun. The Nomu charged first, at incredible speeds whilst Izuku flapped his wings as strong as he could, narrowly dodging it and making sure it wouldn't hit him head-on. He did so, and took advantage of the Nomu's lack of maneuverability as he spent time creating a second pair of wings, and then a third. Each had about the same amount of charge, but it meant he was far more versatile. Even if he was steadily getting more tired, one pair originated from just near his shoulder blades, another near his mid-back and the last from just next to his hips. He beat them in order, from the top pair to the bottom each time, creating a wave motion of green lightning as he soared across the sky. The Nomu was hot on his tail, twitching angrily as it began almost melting its arm into itself, preparing a blast of some kind. The hand retracted deep into its right arm before suddenly expelling itself with a rapid speed. The right hand itself was attached by a thin muscle fiber that kept extending as it was used like a flail weapon. Izuku quickly merged two of his middle wings and slid them down his right arm, swinging it downwards. "Lightning Edge!" he declared, and with that the lightning on his right arm formed into a blade-like structure along the side of his forearm. The edge of it was his, quickly becoming infamous, emerald green that shone with the fury of the sun itself. With it, he severed through the muscle with little difficulty, causing the extended hand to fall limply to the ground. Very, very far away. Izuku didn't stop there, however, as he used his remaining four wings to make a very sharp turn back towards the Nomu. Whilst it was still regenerating the arm, Izuku proceeded to swoop by, arm slicing off the other arm. It screeched in frustration as its jaw opened wider, revealing in place of an inner mouth just a black void, and teeth that appeared sharper than anything Izuku had encountered in the past, which then shot out. Izuku quickly brought his left arm forward, the dozen teeth that were ejected as projectiles all directed towards his face. He quickly returned the wings that were the blade on his right to his back, and kept flying backwards away from the Nomu as it regrew its arms, whilst Izuku winced as the teeth each embedded themselves into the arm protecting his face, in places where his gauntlet did not protect. Blood began trickling down that arm as Izuku took further advantage of his higher mobility to weave between the massive buildings as the Nomu began tearing through the skies after him. "Nizu! What's the highest building here?" Izuku called out as he began flying up, Above 300 meters should be safe. Nizu responded after a brief moment's silence. Alright, aiming for 400, get the helicopters out of here. Affirmative. As Izuku gave the order, he could faintly hear someone, presumably Aizawa-sensei, arguing on the phone to whoever was in charge of it before it promptly flew further away from the impending battlefield. As it did so, Izuku twisted to aim upwards, going higher where he didn't need to worry about buildings as collateral or losing track of the Noma. His wings flapped in unison now, his speed increasing more and more as he approached his destination altitude. In the meantime, he was able to pluck each of the teeth embedded in his upper arm out, whilst also preparing several dozen of the railgun pellets. As the Noma chased behind him, Izuku continued weaving his way higher into the sky. Nizu! If I stop, how long will it take for the Noma to catch up to me? Izuku asked as he continued flying higher, beginning to circle lightning around his right arm, preparing his railgun shot. The lightning rapidly circled his right arm, in jagged shapes with small branches going just outside the perimeter of the shape. Within his hand were the pellets that he was preparing for his next shot, at least 50 of the small spherical projectiles within. Probably half a second, Nizu responded, basing it off of approximates from the news footage. That's long enough for me. Izuku responded as he flapped his wings once more before swiftly twisting around to fly backwards for a moment. Railgun shotgun! Izuku yelled as the whirring exponentially sped up, the green lightning that was wrapping around his arms becoming a blur that was a cylinder of iridescent emerald. The Noma continued soaring towards him, however in that split second Izuku fired. The resulting bang throughout the skies was deafening. It echoed across the empty blue sky, the shockwave from the sound barrier being broken shattered many windows of the skyscrapers and the few wisps of clouds were completely blown away. And of course, the green lightning that scattered across the sky. It was almost in a two-dimensional plane from afar or from the ground, the lightning formation that came out with all the grace and beauty of a snowflake in green as the energy used was dispersed. Of course, the impact itself. The pellets all flew out in a narrow cone of spray at tremendous speed towards the Noma, which had neither the agility nor the stopping power to avoid any of them. Each hit the creature, some traveling straight through it in various locations in its arms, torso, and legs whilst other went through its head. The Noma would not be killed, but at least be severely damaged by the pellets as the impact sent it hurtling towards the ground, reaching speeds several times over the sound barrier. Izuku did not follow it however, and opted to build charge in his arms as he continued watching it. Eventually, it smashed directly into the road, and formed a large crater of impact that seemed to freeze for a moment before all the debris began hurtling outwards. Izuku aimed for it to land in one of the already destroyed blocks, so it wouldn't cause too much more damage as the Noma was additionally impaled by the jagged and broken sections of what was once a multi-story building. It screeched, although it was difficult to tell why. Potentially pain, potentially irritation, but most likely frustration as it ripped itself off of the rubble, and the innards spilling out of the massive hole Izuku opened in it, along with the other ones. They began stitching themselves back together with black tendril-like structures. It began propelling itself upwards despite not being fully healed yet, and began preparing another attack against Izuku, who was still getting his energy back. Izuku saw the both of the arms of the Noma buff up to massive extent, and he couldn't help but think about the monstrous arms that All for One used. These arms were about as big, but probably stronger as it lacked the mess of other quirks used in the process, effectively making it raw muscle. That would be dangerous. It gripped at the ground, tearing it with its bare hands before it flung itself towards Izuku with a great speed. It had sacrificed control for raw speed, but its raw speed significantly outpaced Izuku. Izuku's eyes widened as he flew to the left as fast as possible, trying to avoid the inevitable blow. Unfortunately, the Noma cleared the expanse between them in a matter of seconds, and Izuku didn't have the acceleration required. And with the Noma's massive reach it was able to easily land a devastating blow. Even with the minimal mobility of it, the Noma was capable of just slightly redirecting itself to maintain course towards Izuku. The massive fist slammed right into Izuku's left shoulder, as he had rapidly rotated to try and shield himself partially from the intense blow. And to some extent, it worked. To another extent, it absolutely did not. As a direct result, Izuku felt his shoulder almost shatter into pieces, the sheer impact force of the blow not only doing that but causing him to fly way out of control rapidly. He could hear Nizu and the teachers panicking, but the pain was causing many issues for him. Most importantly, it was incredibly painful. Izuku did his best not to scream in pain, opting to hiss instead as he fought to regain control over his flight. Eventually he did, but now he was much closer to the evacuating civilians. Some of them stopped to look at him, but he didn't have time to try and reassure them as the Noma began to jet towards him. The massive arms were changed from thickness to length as it extended the muscle, grabbing onto the roof of a few nearby buildings which it then slingshot forward. Except, it wasn't directed towards Izuku, it was directed to go towards some of the civilians. Izuku acted fast and spiraled downwards, catching the extended fist with his right arm whilst the Noma's left was hooked onto a building. Izuku was pushed back further from the impact. He was now a few crossroads away from the quickly panicking civilians. Daring a look over his shoulder, he could see several civilians that were being injured by others in their panic and distress to escape. Amongst them, young children separated from their parents. As he pushed back against the Noma's arm whilst it was bringing its left forward, he couldn't help but picture Eri. Kids that needed saving, someone to protect them. Izuku pumped more energy into his right arm to begin pushing back, holding the best grip he could in the ground as he dug deeper in. Nizu! Bioelectricity requirements for shoulder movement! Izuku yelled into his earpiece as he began pumping more energy through his body as he prepared himself. You should need at minimum about 25 watts for basic movement. Nizu responded. Perfect. Izuku responded as he smirked. Overdrive! This was a move he had theorized previously but never had much use for. But manual control of his own limbs would allow exact movement, allowing him greater control and, well, overdrive of himself. But he didn't know how long he could maintain it. It would basically override his own bodily production of the electricity so for as long as he could maintain it, but it may cause some interesting side effects afterwards. With it, he suppressed the pain in his shoulder as sparks flying off his body extended further behind him, as though they were supporting him. He began lifting his left hand to point it towards the Noma, who seemed shocked and began mutating its body partially to dig into the ground with better grip as it began bringing its left arm forward. However, Izuku was faster. With great effort and incredibly meticulous quirk work, he raised his left arm with minimal pain before pushing through a powerful charge. Maximum repulsion, he declared. With the combination of his overdrive move, he created a barrier of lightning that sent the Noma flying away distantly. However, rather than up, he drove it forward, relative to Izuku. This caused it to be sent dragging through the ground, ripping it up as he went flying blocks away. It was sent at least 100 meters away, and as it went it ripped the torso of the Noma up. However, the way it did damage meant the Noma had to recover innumerable little cuts. With the people behind him watching, Izuku touched his right hand to the ground, and with a burst from his feet he was sent flying forwards, chasing after the Noma. Lightning arced off of Izuku onto the ground as he soared just above the road. His right fist reared back with the gauntlet he was wearing covered in a sheen of green lightning that glowed bright as he made it to the Noma. Lightning fist! With that, Izuku slammed the fist through the torso of the Noma, opening a large hole in its torso. The fist had tore into the Noma like a hot knife through butter, and whilst his fist was still in it, Izuku then let the remaining lightning spread throughout the remainder of the Noma. Shatter! Then, it exploded. It sent all parts of the Noma all over the place, most of which ended up disintegrating. Except for the head. It began regenerating quite slowly. Slower than before. Izuku had used most of his energy during that attack, so he couldn't finish it off, but once it finished regenerating it was definitely weaker than before. It was thinner, and lacked even the slight build it had previously. With newfound confidence, Izuku charged towards the Noma. With his overdrive running, Izuku began creating a dual blade on his right hand, two short blades that reached their end at a point not so far from each other. These blades were a solid creation of lightning, a significant amount of his remaining energy being used each moment they were active. Overdrive strikes! Izuku yelled. Unfortunately, he had to divert energy from other places, so his pain was beginning to come back. Thankfully, adrenaline pouring through his veins numbed the pain somewhat. With his declaration, lightning coursing through his veins allowed him to strike with rapid succession, and the extreme precision allowed from his overdrive meant he could strike perfectly. Izuku knew that he hadn't been paying enough to his energy levels. He knew he was running low. This would be close to the limits of it, as adrenaline was only doing so much to allow him to ignore his growing headache. With each strike, he cut away more of the Nomu, striking several times in a second, and eventually, he got to the Noma's head. With a powerful blow, he aimed to strike straight through it. If only things were as simple as that. The Nomu, whether it be luck, strength, or skill, managed to shoot needles straight into Izuku's striking hand, causing him to lose concentration for a moment. And with that, the energy dispersed outwards. This sudden expulsion caused Izuku to be sent flying back, and the Noma further away. It caused Izuku to be pushed through the ground, cut by the rubble as the Noma was, until he was impaled by a particularly large one. Because the Noma had already tore up the rubble going forwards, now that he was going backwards, he was prone to several different bits of rubble, and several were particularly large, and it brought him to an unfortunate stop. One pierced directly through his leg, another through his lower torso. He spat out blood, and his body was forced in a position where he had to look upwards. The sky was beautiful blue. It reminded him of Nejire, and he just basked in memories. He was still barely able to move his right arm. That would be enough to finish it. A final blow. At some point the earpiece had fallen out. His energy was flowing through his right arm. He had stopped pulling it anywhere else, and all he had to do was wait for the Noma to come for him. Izuku raised his head to watch it. It was coming from the sky. It was kind of graceful to an extent. As graceful as a murderous monster that had incredibly inhuman proportions could be, that is. Despite this, he waited, and soon it reached to begin striking. Izuku raised his right arm. He could see a helicopter out of the corner of his eye. He turned to face it. He gave the best smile he could, even with the blood in his teeth. Obliterate were the words heard around the nation from the news crew thanks to someone's quirk, as a brilliant green dome appeared around Izuku and the Noma. And once the dome cleared, the battlefield fell silent. Yui was silent. Apparently after the green dome dispersed, it disrupted many different radio and television signals. And so the aftermath was unknown. Sometime during the fight, Nejire told Eri to go to her mama's room and play there because the teenagers wanted to watch some grown-up shows. Eri mumbled something about wanting to watch Papa fight before going upstairs. Nejire was unspeakably thankful she did so. She was out of tears to cry. Her voice was hoarse, and so she became still. She was frozen. One of the teachers came bursting in. Nejire thought it was Midnight but wasn't too sure. Midnight rushed up to the girl and gently hugged her as a parent would a child. She spoke reassurances to the shell-shocked girl, but was unable to elicit a response. She wasn't expecting one. Midnight had seen what happened too. Class 1A was in sheer shock after the screen cut to static. None said a word. There wasn't much that could be said. Bakugo had tears streaming down his face as Yaoyorozu did her best to comfort him, as the boy remained still, tensed in his seat on the couch. Todoroki, Ida and Yarashi were simply shell-shocked. The rest of the class weren't much better, some in tears and others frozen in place. The silence of 1A would remain as such, even when Aizawa-sensei came in to console and comfort the class with Hound Dog. Hound Dog was going to have a very long day ahead of him. The teachers were a mess. Most were pulling all the strings they could in order to get some kind of information, but so far were coming up short. Others were arranging for whatever they could, but it didn't seem like there was much for them to do. Niza was still, however. He had grown a great bond with Izuku, and he knew exactly what Izuku had done. Izuku knew that the alternative at that point may have been far worse. After all, the city's complete destruction switch was for the entire city, and by proxy all the evacuees. His was more controlled, and worked much better. To the government and higher-ups, Izuku was nothing more than a statistic. To the people, he was to be immortalized as a hero in life or death. To the students, a beacon of which to aim for. To his friends, a friend to keep forever. To his family, love and purity. To Eri, hope and protection. And to Nejire, the embodiment of love. And everyone hoped that he would come back to continue fulfilling those roles. However, in a matter of moments Niza had started moving again, and incredibly quickly. In a matter of moments he had created a plan with little more than what appeared to be his paws moving rapidly across the paper with a pen in hand. With a few more swipes he had produced several different plans, and had handed them to some of the still remaining teachers. One to Cementos, one to Recovery Girl, and one to Power Loader. All of them looked at their plans, various instructions for what they needed to do. Each were quick to get to work whilst Nizu rushed to his office to get what he needed. He scooped it up before Mirio suddenly rushed into his office. Before he could get a word in edgewise, Niza started talking. Perfect, Mirio. Take this and go to Power Loader's workshop. Right. Mirio was a little taken aback by the principal's demeanor but did not question it as he scooped the machine into his arms and started going. Faster would be better. Niza yelled down the hall as Mirio began jogging slightly carefully. Niza quickly went back to his P-Data system. Would? Niza thought for a moment. He needed at least 2 heroes that could fly along with an electrical producer, and people to help move equipment. Nejire Hado, Tamaki Amajiki, Momo Yayorozu, Tenya Ida, Eijiro Kurishima, Tetsu Mizo Shoji, Rikido Sato, Jiroda Shishida and Denki Kaminari, please report to my office ASAP. That's Nejire Hado, Tamaki Amajiki, Momo Yayorozu, Tenya Ida, Eijiro Kurishima, Tetsu Mizo Shoji, Rikido Sato, Jiroda Shishida and Denki Kaminari to my office please. Thank you. Within 30 seconds, Nejire was flying through his door, Tamaki not far behind. Principal Nizu, what can we help with? Nejire cried, tears still evident on her face. She wasn't displaying any of her usual bubbliness, which Nizu could understand, and Tamaki's usual shy atmosphere was replaced with a weightier depressive atmosphere. He handed them the plan he had created for them and within moments they were out the door, determination and hope shining in their eyes. They'll stop at the canteen to get Tamaki some meal, and something with flight capability. Then, they'll fly to the scene and hopefully by then the government would have declared it was clear for paramedics to make their way there before taking Izuku back to the school as fast as possible where we can facilitate his healing better with our knowledge on his quirk than a hospital may, and with Recovery Girl here. Moments after the third-year students left, Kaminari came into the room. Principal Niza, sir? He asked, and Niza was quick to respond. Go to Power Loader's workshop. Follow his instructions exactly. Yes, sir. Kaminari responded immediately, still slightly shocked. The remaining students entered not long after, some sobbing and tears still streaming down their face whilst the rest had either tear tracks down their cheeks or were simply frozen. You guys will have a very important job. I need you to go down to Recovery Girl's office and do whatever she asks. You will mostly be moving equipment. Ida, you may be running things from nearby clinics and hospitals, whilst Yayorozu you will be making things on demand for both her and Power Loader. Go! The reasoning to every student was unspoken. We need to save Izuku. Nejire and Tamaki were deathly silent on their flight across. Nejire was still doing her best to suppress her sobs whilst Tamaki was just shocked. Tamaki was going as fast he could whilst Nejire was resisting the urge to completely outpace the shy hero in training. Luckily for her, he broke the silence. Go ahead, Nejire, I'll be there soon. Izuku inspired me to do something to speed up. It'll just take a moment. Even if the 2 students were still in casual outfit, neither of them cared about that right now. Tamaki's shirt was torn at the back, whilst Nejire's pants were turned into shorts with the sheer amount of energy she was using to fly. When Tamaki said that, Nejire wasted no time in speeding up, breaking the sound barrier as she flew faster through the sky, doing her best to get there as fast as possible. Unfortunately, it was not a short journey. A little over 100 kilometers, close to 15 minutes later, and Nejire had landed. She could see some minor heroes doing crowd control as she touched down, however she ignored it all as she focused on the buildings. Some paramedics had finally made their way through the crowd towards the scene of the final fight as they were jostled by reporters and civilians alike, some with phones out. She felt her heart tear and shatter as she realized this meant that whilst the paramedics were dispatched as soon as possible, they weren't able to get through the crowds. She flew over the crowd and it briefly caught their attention as they watched her yellow energy dance through the air behind her as she flew but did not interact with them. She had to get to Izuku. Even if the paramedics wouldn't be there yet, she would be able to get there first. Luckily for her, Tamaki wasn't far behind. And when he saw what was happening with the crowds and, safe to say, lost it. The minor heroes weren't able to get enough attention, but Tamaki was. Whilst Nejire was flying her way directly to the scene of the fight, Tamaki roared at the crowd, almost literally. With 6 wings on his back, he yelled with a defiance and fury that caught the attention of everyone in the crowd. Look at yourselves! I may fly, but you're the vultures here, looking to profit off disasters, making it impossible for the paramedics to get through. This should not be the scene of your next great story, as those of you with your phones out seem to think, but this is the scene of a tragedy. You're making it impossible for those who actually help, actually contribute. He screamed at them, subconsciously expanding his wings further out, the shortest at the base only being half the length of the tallest at the top. However, the wings at the top were each extended over 2 meters, making him a terrifying, intimidating, angry hero looking down upon them. Many of the camera crews looked really sheepish and began backing away, whilst a few brave individuals with their phones remained defiant and seemed more than a little stupid. However, they were quickly dragged away by some of their, evidently, smarter friends. With a clear path, the paramedics began running down to the front of the barrier line. Tamaki was still fuming as what he had just done kicked in, but before he could get too shy about it, Nejire's scream brought him to action. "Tamaki! Eel arms! Now!" She screamed at the top of her lungs. Tamaki flew as fast as he could, changing his arms over as fast as he could. He knew this meant it was probably one of the worst possible cases. As he was flying over, he was generating as much static as he could with the eel arms, and he saw Nejire's spiraling energy going to the skies. He used this as a beacon to guide him through the winding roads and buildings. Once he got there, he saw Nejire clutching Izuku tightly to her, energy spiraling rapidly from her towards the sky as she wailed. It seemed that even after what they saw on T.V, Nejire couldn't have been ready for what she found, and Tamaki couldn't blame her. He tried to get closer, but her energy was beginning to form a growing spiral. "Nejire! Nejire!" Tamaki tried calling, but it seemed to be no use. Nejire's grief was too great to break through. She wailed louder, gripping Izuku's limp body tighter to her chest, burying her face into Izuku's neck. She had her back to Tamaki, and he could just about make out some vague features of Izuku. He was covered in burns, his skin so hot still it looked like it was still steaming somewhat. When Izuku recovered, it was likely he would be permanently scarred, perhaps both physically and mentally. And it would be when, Tamaki thought quick. He hadn't eaten enough unique foods recently. The most he had was jellyfish and octopus. He'd have to work with that. "Nejire! If you don't calm down, I'm going to have to sedate you," he declared, giving fair warning to his distraught friend. She did not respond. "Sedating in 3, 2, 1, firing!" With that, he produced a small jellyfish tendril with a focus on the ability to fire the small dart over a long distance. Additionally, the small dart within was coated in a very weak poison from the octopus, just enough to knock her out for a small amount of time. "Nejire Izuku, I'm sorry for this." With that, he fired the dart, and he lodged itself into Nejire's leg, the sheer speed of the dart somehow making through the energy swirls. Once it did, Tamaki quickly flew towards the two, with Nejire's wails subsiding and her beginning to pass out despite still clutching onto Izuku. Tamaki caught the two with one arm and quickly scooped them up, refusing to look at Izuku until he was on solid ground. He made it to a crossroads where hopefully the paramedics would find them quickly as he laid Nejire down, and gently peeled her arms off Izuku, and he meant that. Izuku's body was still so hot that their skin became stuck somewhat, like legs to a hot car seat, and he had to gently, with a few feathers, separate the individuals. He laid Nejire on the ground in the recovery position, just in case, before laying Izuku face up and checking out the wounds. Fighting the deafening heartbeat in his eardrums, Tamaki knew now was not the time to shy away. He had to do the best he could to save his friend. Forming scales on each hand, he worked quickly to undo the green gauntlets, the metal decidedly not helping the green-haired hero cool down. Tamaki wanted to check for signs of life, but it was incredibly difficult when the hero was far too hot to touch. The paramedics were nearby, but Tamaki still had to make their job easier. The scales on his hands protected him from some of the heat as he peeled the steaming gauntlets off Izuku's hands. He quickly tossed the first one aside, it still steaming somewhat as he worked to remove the second as fast as possible. He heard noises from Nejire, signifying she was waking up. Tamaki also saw the medical team were really close. "Do you guys have anything that can cool him down?" he yelled before Nejire could start fully registering what was going on. She had some burns on her arms, but didn't seem to register them. They would probably be injured for a while, but it would heal over eventually. "We have ice and cool packs," one of the paramedics responded as they continued running over. "We're going to need all of them." Tamaki responded quickly as he began removing the remaining scraps of Izuku's hero costume on his upper body with sharpened hawk claws. It revealed the gradually worsening extent of his injuries. Not only the large wounds and broken limbs but the raw flesh and burns covering his body. Tamaki was desperately trying to think of something that could help Izuku cool off as he worked to delicately hold the boy up to let him cool best as possible. The paramedics arrived and Tamaki let them take over. Do the best you can before you can't do more, and we'll take him back to UA. The paramedics nodded as they rapidly surrounded Izuku, placing the ice packs and cooling packs all over the boy's body, and Tamaki quickly went over to Nejire. He helped her sit up and gently turned her away whilst she reoriented herself. Nejire, I need you to listen to me, Tamaki said sternly, one hand on her shoulder. But Izuku! She screamed back at him, trying to turn to look towards where Izuku was currently being treated. Nejire, you need to get a hold of yourself, Tamaki responded, one hand on each shoulder. You don't understand, she yelled back at him, tears brimming in her eyes. No, I don't. I'm not pretending to. But we need to get him back to UA. And we can't do that if you're getting all emotional. But I know, Nejire. I'm really worried too, and probably not as worried as you, yes, but still worried. Nejire couldn't even perform a coherent sentence before she began crying. Tamaki pulled the distraught girl into a hug. It's alright. For now though, we have to hold on to hope and remain as calm as we can. We can deal with our emotions later, Tamaki said, tears rolling down his face as well. Nejire looked at him in the eye and nodded shakily, bringing herself to her feet. I know it'll be hard to look at him, but for his sake, try to remain calm, Tamaki told her before releasing his grip on her as she shakily turned around. Izuku was still surrounded by paramedics, who had managed to cool him down enough to get bandages on him. He should be good to be moved now, one of the paramedics yelled out. Tamaki quickly went over and Nejire ran past him to rush to Izuku's side, the tears streaming down her face. Nejire, Tamaki said to her, a hand on her shoulder. I know. She sniffled, clenching her fists. He's alive, but barely. His condition isn't remotely stable. It's hard to predict what'll even happen in the next few minutes. If you guys can get him to UA within 10 minutes, then we'll hand him over. We'll do it, Nejire said without hesitation, scooping Izuku up in her arms. She was cautious of his badly injured arm, which was also wrapped up tightly. Her voice was shaky but her confidence shone through. Tamaki nodded quickly as he went over. Do you guys have a board or something? Tamaki asked. Yep, we'll strap him to it. A paramedic responded as they quickly constructed the board whilst another paramedic continued to monitor Izuku's vitals. Once it was made, Nejire hesitantly placed Izuku on the board. Once she did, the paramedics set up a mini monitoring system for Izuku's pulse, heartbeat, and lungs that the students could watch as they flew. Nejire took up the front end whilst Tamaki took the back, where he could see the vitals and react better if he needed to. Thank you for your help, Tamaki said to the paramedics who nodded to him as he and Nejire took to the skies. They steadily rose above the height of the buildings, and once they did, Nejire and Tamaki started speeding up. They went as fast as the two could, on a tense, silent flight. Tamaki was watching the vitals carefully, trying his best to remain calm as the numbers fluctuated. He could only do so much, and if he panicked, Nejire definitely would too, and that would lead to some kind of disaster. Although the two students flew places with their quirks all the time, no flight would ever be as long as the one back home. Thank you so much for joining me on this incredible journey today. I hope you enjoyed exploring the fascinating what-if scenario of Deku. The possibilities were truly mind-blowing. If you found this video entertaining, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel. Your support means the world to me and inspires me to bring you more captivating content in the future. Stay tuned for more exciting what-if stories and other amazing videos coming your way. Until next time, take care, stay curious,